Hey guys, my name is JC and today we're playing our Tribal Lord deck led by the Dragon. The goal of this deck is to cast a lot of Changelings and then pair them with Tribal Lords that provide powerful effects. If this deck seems like your kind of fun, then make sure to stop by the channel where we have a deck tech discussing all of the included cards as well as the overall strategy. Let's summon the best Tribal Lords in Magic and see what they can do. Alrighty guys, let's see who we're playing today. We have partner pairing of Haldan, Avid Arcanist with Paco, Arcane Retriever. We also have Zacama, Primal Calamity, and finally we have Sidisi, Brrod Tyrant. Alright, let's take a look at our opening hand. I think it's actually pretty good. Yuriko gives us card advantage as well as damages our opponents and starts to get out of hand pretty quickly if they don't have an answer. Torian Mauler gets big, we've got enough lands, we also have mana acceleration, so it's pretty much everything you want, so we'll keep this. Zakama starts us off by playing a land for turn, and they pass it over. Sidisi just starts by playing a tap land for turn, and that is it for them. Okay, well our first turn is pretty simple. We'll just play our Path of Ancestry tapped, and then we'll pass it over. Paco plays a tap land for turn, and that is going to be it for them. So we see a suspend counter come off Search for Tomorrow, so they must have done that in their first turn. Search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Now they play a land for turn, and finally, they cast themselves a Lotus Cobra. Whenever a land ETB is under your control, add 1 mana of any color. And that is it for the Zacama player. Sidisi plays a fetch land for turn. They crack it straight away. Then they put a land into play. And now they play a Mesmeric Orb. Whenever a permanent becomes untapped, that permanent's controller mills a card. Okay, well I'm always one to say that milling effects with your opponents can be dangerous. It can be a double-edged sword. Because sometimes, well, a lot of the time decks do run a lot of recursion. I know I'm always a big fan of it, so we'll see if they end up breaking it more than we do. No doubt their deck is definitely built around it, but like I said, a lot of decks run recursion. You only need that one card to pop off. Now it does trigger on our upkeep, so we will have to mill 1 card. And we mill ourselves a Mistwalker. And then we draw Hoffrey for turn, which is really good for board protection, which our deck definitely needs because we're so heavy into creatures. So I think this turn we'll just play our Secluded Glen, but we will have it come into play tapped, and then we'll cast our Guardian Gladewalker. Remember, even though it costs 2 mana, we do get the 1 cost reduction from our commander, the Dragon. Now that does trigger Path of Ancestry, so we get to scry 1. And it looks like we have a Triumph on the top of our deck. I think I'll actually keep that. Now when Gladewalker ETBs, we're going to put a 1/1 counter on itself, and that's going to be us done for turn. And now we'll be set up to either Ninjutsu in Prosperous Thief or Yuriko, depending on what we draw next turn. Now, Mesmeric Orb does trigger on Paco's upkeep, so they're going to mill 1 here. And we see the big bad Omnath Locus of Rage hit the bin. Now they play a land for turn. And then they follow that up with an Arcane Signet. And that is going to be it for them. Alright, we have 2 Mesmeric Orb triggers go on the stack, as well as Search for Tomorrow. So they are going to cast it now. Let's see what they mill. They get a Rishkar's Expertise and a Forest. Lotus Cobra is going to generate a good amount of mana this turn, if they have a land in hand, which no doubt they probably do. In combination with Search for Tomorrow, they're going to get 2 landfall triggers from Lotus Cobra. Let's just hope they don't have a big ramp piece here. So they decide to put a Plains into play. That triggers Lotus Cobra. They decide to add 1 white mana. And it looks like now they're tapping out. Do they have a 4 mana ramp spell here? No, they decide to untap. Now they go back into it, and now they cast themselves a Cultivate. So they'll put 1 basic land into play tapped and another one into their hand. They put a Mountain into play. That triggers Lotus Cobra. They add 1 green mana. Now they play a Plains for turn, that triggers Lotus Cobra again. Now they add another green. Can they use it here? And they do, they cast Explore. You may play an additional land this turn, draw a card. So the Zacama player is certainly ramping here pretty fast, and once Zacama does come down, it's going to be pretty dangerous for the rest of the table. Especially for us, Zacama's going to be able to have easy pickings with all of our little changelings, at least until we buff them. Now they move to combat, let's see if they swing in, and they decide to swing the Lotus Cobra and it's Sidisi. They won't be able to block that, so they'll take 2 damage. And that is going to be it for them. Now on Sidisi's upkeep, Mesmeric Orb triggers twice. We really have to pay attention to what they mill here, seeing as they really care about their graveyard, so they just hit a land for the first one, and then Embalmer's Tools for the second one. Next they play a land for turn, a Breeding Pool. They take the 2 life so it comes in untapped. Now they cast Urborg Lurgoyf, which I hopefully said that correctly. You can kick it for blue or black. When it ETBs, mill 3 cards for each time it was kicked. And its power is equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard, and its toughness is equal to that number +1. So it's currently a 1/2. And that is it for them. Right, on our upkeep, Mesmeric Orb triggers. So it looks like we mill ourselves a land and a Meeboid Changeling, and we draw ourselves a Shift-In Sliver. Okay, well, that's really nice to be able to get our creatures through for combat damage. Prosperous Thief and Yuriko do care about hitting them, so that's a really good draw there. Now, I think because how fast the Zacama player is ramping here, we have to try to keep up as best we can. So this turn, we might actually try to get our Prosperous Thief into play. So let's start by moving to combat. We'll swing in at the Zacama player. They don't block, so now we're going to Ninjutsu in Prosperous Thief. Damage goes through, that triggers our Prosperous Thief, so now it's going to make a treasure token. Next, we'll play our Breeding Pool. We'll have it come into play untapped, because I think I want to get down Taurian Mauler here. That can grow big really quickly. Might even be able to get out of the range of Zakama being able to zap it. That resolves, and I think we leave it there for turn. If we get our timing right, we might get really lucky and we're able to cast our Peer Pressure to steal Zakama if that ends up being the biggest threat. Now in Paco's upkeep, Mesmeric Orb does trigger twice. Looks like they hit a Noxious Revival and a Yavimaya Coast. Now they play a land for turn, a Blighted Woodland. So they can use that to ramp if they want to. Next, they cast an Explorer of their own. That triggers our Taurian Mauler to put a 1/1 counter on it. So they'll be able to play an additional land this turn and draw a card. They play themselves a Tap Myriad Landscape, so more ramp on their lands. And now they cast 3 visits. So Taurian Mauler is certainly happy. It's getting fed pretty well here. Of course, it's not a big danger at the moment because it doesn't have trample, but it is going to be able to help us get through damage better because our opponents are less likely to block. And I'm really happy to see that the Paco player doesn't actually land any creatures here. That means we can at least get some combat damage through to trigger our Prosperous Thief and possibly Yuriko next turn. It's the one saving grace against big ramp decks, even though they can do pretty scary things in the mid to late game. In the early game, decks like ours can really take advantage of that. And that is it for Paco's turn. So we just have to hope that Zakama doesn't have too big a turn here. Now, Mesmeric Orb triggers a lot of times here. It looks like they mill a Forest. Enlightened Tutor, that's a good hit. Rebuff the Wicked. Rest in Peace. That was going to be the perfect answer to the Sidisi player, so they're probably happy to see that go. We see another Forest. And finally, Stranglehold. Okay, we have a nice Staxy version of Zakama here, which I think our deck can actually play through pretty well, so we don't actually mind for the most part if Zakama actually does resolve some of those pieces. Our deck doesn't really run any tutors at all, so something like Stranglehold isn't going to hurt us at all, beyond our fetch lands, of course. And now they cast Circuitous Route. That does trigger our Taurian Mauler. So now it's currently a 5/5. They're just going to put 2 basic lands into play tapped. They will give them 2 mana off their Lotus Cobra. They decide to add 2 green mana to their mana pool. But they just let that go. They move to combat. Lotus Cobra once again goes towards Sidisi. Let's see if the Sidisi player is tempted to block here with Urborg. They aren't. Damage goes straight through. That knocks them down to 33, and that is it for Zacama. Mesmeric Orb triggers 3 times for Sidisi in their upkeep. They hit an Elves of Deep Shadow, another land, and yet another land. After that, they cast Buried Alive. That triggers our Taurian Mauler. Search your library for up to 3 creature cards, put them into your graveyard, then shuffle. Okay, that's a card we don't normally like to see against a graveyard-heavy deck, especially if this is a combo version of Sidisi, which often when I play this deck, it usually is. Alright, let's see what the 3 creatures are. Looks like we have a Diluvian Primordial, Genesis, and a Stinkweed Imp. That puts their Urborg up to a 5/6. They swing in this time at the Paco player. Paco has to take the damage here. It knocks them down to 35. And the Sidisi player is going to leave it there. Mesmeric Orb triggers 4 times on our upkeep. We mill a land, a Godless Shrine, Silumgar, one of our big beefy creatures, and the final one shall be Necro Duality. Always a really fun card in this deck, so it's a little shame that one's there, but we did draw a pretty good changeling here in a regular cohort. So I think we're going to try to make our land drop here. So we'll just start by casting Yuriko. That goes through. Now let's move to combat. We'll send Taurian Mauler towards Zacama, and we'll send our Prosperous Thief towards the Sidisi player. They take the damage. That triggers our Yuriko and Prosperous Thief. So we'll make 2 treasure tokens here. Alright, and let's see what hits we get off Yuriko. One of them is a land. Well, at least we do make our land drop for this turn. And the second one, a Harmonic Sliver. Well, that is actually quite a nice draw against that Mesmeric Orb there. Now the question for us is, do we cast our Harmonic Sliver now, or do we try to get down a few more changelings? I think while the board is relatively clear, I am actually going to try to get a few more bodies down. That way we can accelerate our mana a lot more and hopefully get a few more Yuriko triggers. So let's play our Hallowed Fountain. We'll have it come in untapped, so we'll pay 2 life. And let's play our irregular cohort. So now when it ETBs, it's going to make another body. And I think that is us done for the turn. Let's just hope we can keep our board state like it is. Alright, now Mesmeric Orb does trigger on Paco's upkeep. It triggers 5 times. We see a land, a bit of ramp, some counter magic, a canopy cover. Okay, that's a good one to get rid of. Allows Paco to kill people really quickly. Chain reaction. Alright, we're very happy to see that one go. That would have been pretty sad for us if that resolved. And finally, a Barligad recovery. So now they start by playing a land for turn. Do we see Paco come down this turn? Unfortunately, he probably isn't going to get real good hits off us for the most part. Alright, I think we are, judging by the mana that's in the mana pool there at the moment. Yep, we do. We see Paco come down. That triggers our Taurian Mauler. Who knows, maybe we get lucky and our Taurian Mauler actually gets bigger than Paco. It's a pretty hard race, but we'll see how it goes if it survives. Paco has haste, and when it attacks, exile the top card of each player's library and put a fetch counter on each of them. Put a 1/1 counter on Paco for each non-creature card exiled this way. Paco is a creature that gets out of hand very quickly. And it's also a very fun and powerful deck if you enjoy playing other people's cards. So the question now is, where does Paco go in? Do they start to fear us a little bit seeing what we're doing with a Yuriko and a Prosperous Thief on board? Or are they still a little worried about the other decks? They might think that what we're doing is a little bit memey. I guess we're going to get the answer now. So they move to combat. Let's see if the Changeling deck gets respect. And it looks like they're swinging towards the Sidisi player. So Paco does trigger. Let's see what they get. Looks like they hit a Midnight Clock, a Life's Legacy, a Muldrotha. That's very good, especially with what they were milling there. And for us, our Seagate Lawmaster. Okay, so not a good hit off us, but the rest are actually pretty good. So Paco is a 5/5 now. They can't block. They have to take the damage. So that knocks them down to 22. Now in their second main phase, they cast Slip Out the Back on their commander. Put a 1/1 counter on target creature. It phases out. And that does trigger our Taurian Mauler. So we'll add the counter. They do have 1 red mana up. I really hope they don't have a Blasphemous Act here. That's probably the only reason I could see why they're doing it now, unless they're really worried about interaction from the other players. Okay, they cast the 1 red. That was 1 red tapped there. Well, actually, from memory, Blasphemous Act is 9 mana, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Ooh, they may have calculated, if they do have that in their hand, they may have calculated that with Paco on the field, but maybe didn't take into account once it phased out, they needed 1 more mana. And that is it for their turn. So we might have got lucky there. It also probably means if either of our other opponents don't get rid of our board, we're going to have to probably move pretty quick here before we lose everything. If we can resolve Hoffrey though, it's not going to matter too much. We'll just get our board back. Now on Zakama's upkeep, Mesmeric Orb does trigger. Let's go to the graveyard and see what goes in there. We see a land, Creeping Corrosion, destroy all artifacts, a bit more ramp, Mana Flare, a little bit more ramp again, Nissa's Pilgrimage, and yet another piece of ramp. So it looks like this deck is all in on ramp pieces as well as stacks elements, and it seems they're very commander-centric with Zacama. Now after that, they do cast Rampant Growth, which triggers our Taurian Mauler. So now Mauler's a 9/9. That triggers Lotus Cobra to make a mana. They add 1 green. Oh, and that's quite the horrible spell to see for us, unfortunately. They cast themselves a Farewell, which triggers our Taurian Mauler, so it'll get a counter, but unfortunately it won't matter. Not unless the Sidisi player has some counter magic here to stop it. So it's likely we see everything go here, including graveyards. So a little bit of sad state of affairs to see that happen, especially with a Paco on board that is going to come back down. But I suppose with Yuriko out and that the the Zacama player really felt they had to click that button, and that's fair enough. We had mana acceleration card advantage on board. If we would have gotten to next turn resolving Hoffrey, it would have been pretty bad for them. And that is it for their turn. And in a big mana deck like Zacama, they can afford to do this anyway. The late game is where they really want to be. Our deck, not so much. I mean, we can grind well with this, but as in any creature-heavy deck, we are very susceptible to board wipes, especially ones that do exile. So even our minimal amount of recursion package can't really help us to get back into it as much as we'd like. So Sidisi just starts their turn by casting their commander, Sidisi Brrod Tyrant. When Sidisi ETBs or attacks, mill 3 cards, and whenever 1 or more creatures are put in your graveyard from your library, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Now when they mill here, and they mill a Craterhoof Behemoth and a Perpetual Timepiece, that does trigger their commander. They make a 2/2 zombie. But that is it for their turn. Alright, we draw a Rick for turn. So I think the process for us at the moment is just one of rebuilding and hoping we can survive long enough to get to a strong board state like we did before. So even though this play is mana efficient, I don't really want to get Rick down because Rick does tend to ring some alarm bells and it gives our opponents a little bit of an idea about what we're trying to build up to. So as inefficient as it's going to be, I think we just cast Guardian Gladewalker here. We'll use Path of Ancestry so we can at least scry and fix our next draws. We have a land on top, which we'll actually keep. Guardian Gladewalker will trigger on its ETB. We'll just put a counter on itself again. And then that is us done for turn. Paco starts by playing a land for turn. Now they crack their Myriad Landscape, so they'll put 2 basic lands into play tapped, and they will have to share a basic land type. They put 2 islands into play. And now they cast Irenicus's Vile Duplication, targeting their commander. Create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except the token has flying, and it isn't legendary if that creature is legendary. Okay, that's a big problem for the rest of the table. 1 Paco is already enough, but 2 now, it's going to be generating them a lot of card advantage. And it's going to be hitting pretty hard as well. So I hope the Zacama player has more removal in their hand there. Now they move to combat. Let's see who they see as a threat now. Paco's still going in towards Sidisi, and new Paco's going towards us. That triggers both Pacos twice. Looks like they get a Rampant Growth, Forest, Victimize, Stitcher's Supplier. They get both our lands there. Also Zendikar's Royal and Swords to Plowshares. Yep, this is definitely looking like it's been Paco's game. Sidisi decides to block with their zombie token, which they really need to do. Paco kills people with commander damage very quickly. I'm happy to take the damage here, especially because it's not from the commander Paco. If we can rebuild our board state up, Rick can gain his life back pretty quickly. And that is it for their turn. And ask and ye shall receive. It looks like Zakama cast Hour of Revelation. Destroy all non-land permanents, and it costs 3 less to cast if there are 10 or more non-land permanents on the battlefield. So we're definitely in for a grindy game here. It's going to be a real good test of our deck to see how it actually does go in the late game. Which, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think we're going to be doing as good as most of these other decks at the table, but we have to wait and see. Never ever give up until you know it's absolutely over. And that is it for Zacama. Sidisi starts by casting Eternal Witness. When it ETBs, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand. Alright, let's see what they target here. They just go for their land. Probably a good idea, especially if this game's getting grindy. You need to make sure you have enough mana available, especially against these 2 big mana decks. They play the land for turn. And now they cast Deranged Assistant. Tap, mill a card, add colorless. But that is it for them. We draw a Changeling for turn. Alright, well we don't have much choice here. I think we just cast our Ghostly Changeling. That triggers Path of Ancestry. We have Harabraz Druid on top, a really good mana dork for our deck, which I'd love to get, but it's very likely that Paco comes down next turn, so they're just going to be able to take it straight away from us. So I'm going to put that on the bottom of our library. And unfortunately, that is it for us. The limit on our mana production is unfortunately slowing us down and stopping what we can do. So we're just at the mercy of our opponents, well, especially these 2 players here. The biggest upside for us is they do have low cards in hand, but remembering Paco has access to a lot of cards from the rest of us, it's going to be tough, that's for sure. Paco just starts their turn as we expected by recasting their commander. Let's see if when they move to combat, they decide to still focus on the Sidisi player. Hopefully they don't have their eyes on us. So now they move to combat. And Paco does come our way, unfortunately. That does trigger Paco. Let's see what they get. Oh, Beast Within, that's a really good hit. They get a land there, an Altar of Dementia, and a Malcolm. We would have really loved to have seen Malcolm there. Especially with the board state the way it is, we could have started to generate some mana. We'll take the damage here. It is going to be a 6/6. So it takes us down to 23 with 6 commander damage. And that is it for them. Alright, well the Zacama player is at enough mana to be able to cast their commander. Let's see if they do it. They just move straight through their first main phase. So now we're in their second main phase. Alright, they just tap all their mana down and we do see the big bad dinosaur come down. Zacama Primal Calamity. When it ETBs, if you cast it, untap all lands you control. And for 3 mana, you can either deal 3 damage to target creature, destroy an artifact or enchantment, or gain 3 life. Very powerful ability on a creature, though for 9 mana, that's what you expect. Alright, looks like they're tapping out here for 7 total mana. No, 8 mana now. And now they cast Zendikar Resurgent. When you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana of any type that land produced, and whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. Alright, well the Zacama players become dangerous quite quickly. But like I said earlier in the game, this is the place Zacama wants to be, and that is it for their turn. One thing to note though is because they only have access to white mana at the moment, all they're going to be able to do with Zacama is actually gain some life. But if Zacama does survive for even a turn cycle, they're going to pretty much be able to take out any threats that come down, especially with double mana, and they're going to refill their hand pretty quickly. And I think the Sidisi player knows this because they're taking a little bit to decide on what they're going to be doing in their first main phase. It's hard once Zacama lands. You have to really think through what you're going to be able to do. Sad thing is, if we just had one more changeling down on the battlefield, we could have cast Peer Pressure and actually gained control of Zacama. Alright, it looks like Sidisi's going to be doing something here. No, and it looks like what they're doing is they're actually conceding. Well, that moves straight to our turn now. We do draw a land for turn. It is going to come into play tapped, so we will start by playing that. A little sad for us that they conceded because that just means now that Zacama's job is a lot more easy to take us out. It also takes the card advantage away from Paco. That is what happens when you play in a 4-player game, especially online. Unfortunately, you can't talk to the other players to say, hey, can you hang around just to make life a little bit easier? So look, we can't do really much this turn, but at least we can contribute to the table by taking out that Zendikar Resurgence. So let's play our Harmonic Sliver. At least we can try to slow down what Zacama's doing. So when it ETBs, we will target Zendikar Resurgent. That goes down. No doubt Zacama's not going to be pretty happy with us, but we'll see if the fear of Paco is enough that they still don't swing in towards our way. I'm sure they're still probably more worried about Paco and what it can do, especially with access to that removal right there. So we'll just move to combat. We'll swing in towards Paco, get a little bit of damage in. In response, Paco casts Crop Rotation. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sack a land, search your library for a land card, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle. And they find themselves a Field of the Dead. Okay. And we'll make them some good bodies. It also means they can block our Ghostly Changeling here. I'm not so sure if they needed to make that block. Their life total was relatively healthy. I think they would have had a few more turns with Zacama out. But they might want to just take us off the Changeling plan in case we have anything else dangerous in our hand. So our Changeling goes down. And that's going to be it for our turn. Paco just moves straight to combat. Paco comes our way. That does trigger Paco, so let's see what they get. They get Temporal Spring from their deck, a land there, and a Woodland Changeling from us. I am going to block here. I just think we need to. At this point, it's going to be pretty tough for us to get back into the game, especially without any Changelings on board to be able to use with our Tribal Lords. So at this point, it's just the mere act of survival that we're trying to get through. Our Sliver goes down. Next, they cast a Sol Ring in their second main phase. And now they cast their partner, Haldan, Avid Arcanist. You may play lands and cast non-creature spells from among cards you exile that have fetch counters on them, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. Alright, it's likely that we see Beast Within cast on Zacama now. They do follow that up by playing a land, which does trigger Field of the Dead to make a zombie. And then they actually cast a Swords to Plowshares, which is actually from Zacama's deck. So they are going to exile it. That does gain them life. They go back up to 37. Next, they cast Roiling Regrowth. Sack a land, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. That's going to trigger their Field of the Dead 2 times. So the Zombie Horde is a mass in here. And we just also get to see the real strength of Field of the Dead in the mid to late game, especially in a landfall heavy deck where your ramp package does revolve around lands. It really makes those ramp cards a lot more useful in the late game. So now we move to the Zacama player's turn. They do play a land for turn. And now they cast Tooth and Nail, which was Entwined, I'm very sure. Search your library for up to 2 creature cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle. And then you can put up to 2 creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. Okay, well this card is often known as being a 1-card win con. Not always, but we'll see if that's the case here. So it looks like they get themselves Xenagos as well as Wildspine Worm. That is going to be a big hitter there. That's going to double its power, and it is going to have Trample, so that's definitely not a 1-card win con, but I have to say I respect it. I like that a lot. Our Wildspine Worm has Trample. When it dies, create 3 5/5s with Trample. And when it's put into a graveyard from anywhere, shuffle it into its owner's library. But it looks like we do have a response here from the Paco player, because Zacama is attempting to move to combat here. And they do cast Beast Within, targeting the Wildspine Worm. It's not an absolute clean answer for it though. It is going to spit out some bodies. So now Wildspine Worm does go down. We see the 3/3 Beast come down first. Next we see the 3 5/5 Tramplers. And that is going to fizzle the Xenagos trigger. And after all that, that is it for the Zacama player. So for us at the moment, the biggest problem is having no blockers, and the Zacama player having blockers means that Paco's probably going to come our way. So really for us, the only way we're going to survive here is just by putting bodies down continuously and hoping that we can survive. But at the moment, we're really spectators here. So I think we'll actually cast Rick here. He's probably the least useful at the moment. We'll just choose Vigilance and Lifelink as the abilities if we ever get the chance to use them, which is very unlikely. But at least as a blocker, it does gain us a little bit of life back. And once again, unfortunately for us, that is all we're doing. Paco starts their turn by casting Temporal Spring. And it looks like that's targeting Xenagos. Put target permanent on top of its owner's library. So that gets rid of Xenagos. Now they move to combat. We get ready to take our beats. And yep, Paco is coming our way. That does trigger Paco. Let's see what they get. Tamio's safekeeping. Oh, that's really good for them. They actually hit Xenagos, it looks like. And from us, they just get a Changeling. Okay, well, that's probably going to be able to kill us really, really well. I don't think blockers are going to be good for us anymore. And unfortunately, that does actually cause the Zacama player to scoop up there. So I think it's all but over for us now. We'll just block with Rick here. And that is it for Paco's turn. All right, let's see what we draw here. I don't think there's really anything we can get that's going to bring us back into the game. But we'll take a look anyway. Shapesharer. Yep, I don't think that's going to get it done. So what we'll do is we'll start by casting Magda first. And then we'll follow up by casting Shapesharer. We'll use Path of Ancestry so we can scry. Just a Hibernation Sliver. We'll leave that on top. We're happy for Paco to take that. And then we'll just pass it over from here. Paco just moves straight to combat. They send in Paco as well as 3 of their zombies. Alright, let's see what Paco hits. They get an island. And our Hibernation Sliver like we knew. That puts it up to 10. Even if they use Tamio's safekeeping, that's not going to be enough to kill us with commander damage. So I'm actually going to let that damage go through. We won't block with anything because we really need a board presence if there's any chance that we're going to be able to come back in this game. So that takes us down to 10. Next, Paco casts Zendikar's Royal. It has landfall. Whenever a land ETBs under your control, create a 2/2 green elemental creature token. Next, they play a land for turn, which does trigger Field of the Dead and Zendikar's Royal. So we'll see a zombie and an elemental come down. After that, they sacrifice their Blighted Woodland. That's going to allow them to put another 2 lands into play. So we're going to see 4 more tokens enter the battlefield now. But after all that, Paco passes the turn. And we draw Unsettled Mariner for turn, so a Changeling. It would have been nice to have seen that come down just a little earlier. So I think our opponent has got us here, so all we'll do, we'll get down Hoffrey. He's been sitting in our hand for quite a while. Then we'll just move to combat. We'll try to have a little fun on our way out. So we'll swing in with both Magda and our Shapesharer. That triggers Magda to make us 2 treasure tokens. Our opponent just blocks with 2 zombie tokens. All the creatures will trade. That does trigger our Hoffrey twice. So both come back into play as spirits. And finally, we'll finish up by casting Unsettled Mariner. And now we'll pass it over to our opponent and we'll accept our fate. Paco starts by casting Tamio's Safekeeping, targeting Paco. Target permanent you control gains Hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. You gain 2 life. Next, they cast a Blasphemous Act. Well, that's definitely going to get it done. Because doing the math, I think we may have actually been able to survive if they didn't have any other shenanigans. It would have been on very low life. So we would have been able to, but this is pretty much all going to close the game out. Now that will trigger Magda and Shapeshare, putting them back into our graveyard, and Hoffrey as well. We will get 1 copy of our Unsettled Mariner. So I guess that does actually technically keep us alive here. Unless they have another answer to be able to bounce it. And it looks like they do, but they end up stealing the creature instead. They cast Blatant Thievery, which does trigger our Unsettled Mariner, but they're going to be able to pay for it. So now Paco moves to combat. They swing in with their big boy. Najila, a really good card, and Shark Typhoon, equally a good card. And that is the game done there, guys. Alright, let's go to the review and discuss what happened. So in this game, we got off to a good start landing a card advantage and mana acceleration piece, and had the game gone on that way for another turn or 2, I think we would have been in a really strong position. Unfortunately, that farewell really undid us, and we struggled to gain traction after that. The Paco player, however, showed just how well they can grind into the late game. Turn after turn, Paco just kept coming back down, generating card advantage, and by the time Haldan joined the fray, the rest of the table couldn't keep up. Well, that's it for today's video. Although we ended up struggling most of this game, I hope you at least enjoyed seeing some of the potential that this Tribal Lord deck had, at least in the early game. Until next time, guys.